Hey, welcome back to Mocktails with Marina. I'm your host, Marina, and today's a big one. This is episode 101, triple digits, baby. And I'll be honest with you, I almost didn't know how to start this one because the last time I sat down to record an episode, my life looked really different. That was back in December. It is now April, and since then, well, I've become a mom, and I'm sure you're going to hear some baby coos. I am not editing any of them out, my precious boy. So yeah, we've been gone for a little while, and we're coming back. Different. Better, I think, and a lot more tired, but definitely better. Today's episode is one I've been wanting to do for a long time, actually. Way before the baby, way before chaos. It's about multi-passionate entrepreneurship and the evolution of you. What it actually means to be someone who has more than one thing going on, more than one dream, more than one vision or one version of yourself that you'd like to show up as, right? And how this can all coexist. How all of that is actually your power and not your problem. So grab a drink, a mocktail, obviously, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Okay, so I want to take a few minutes before we get into the actual topic to just check in, because I think that's important. I think that's what makes this podcast feel like a real conversation and not just like another piece of content on the internet. So I had my baby in February, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend that those first few weeks were simply magical and effortless. I mean, they were magical, right? Because for me, they weren't effortless. They were wild. They were a little overwhelming. They were one of the hardest and most beautiful things I've ever done in my whole life, and sometimes all within the same 5-minute window. There's this thing that people talk about called the newborn bubble, where you're just in it. Like the whole world outside kind of disappears, and your entire existence collapses into this tiny little person, feeding them, figuring out their cries, surviving on whatever sleep you can scrape together. And honestly, I leaned into that bubble hard. I gave myself permission to just be in it. And that was actually a lesson in itself, by the way, because I am not someone who finds it easy to press pause. I am a doer, a planner, like a person who has approximately 11 different projects running at any given time. So learning to just stop, to not produce or create hustle for a while, that was really uncomfortable. And then it was necessary. And then eventually it was really healing. But the thing that kept happening during those quiet moments at 2 a.m, feeding a newborn in the dark, like my brain wouldn't stop. I'd be sitting there, exhausted beyond words, and my mind would be spinning with ideas, with things I wanted to talk about, with questions about who I was becoming, what I wanted to build, and what this new chapter of my life was going to look like. And one topic that kept coming back over and over, is this idea of being multi-passionate, of being someone who contains multitudes, professionally, personally, creatively, and what that really means. Because becoming a mom didn't take away any of my other identities. It just added one more, a really enormous, really important one. And I had to figure out how all of those versions of me were going to share the same body. So that's where this episode was born, literally. And I'm so glad to be back here with you to share it. Okay, let's talk about what it actually means to be a multi-passionate entrepreneur, because I think this term gets thrown around a lot and it doesn't always land the way that it should. Being multi-passionate doesn't mean that you're scattered. It doesn't mean you can't focus. It doesn't mean you haven't figured out what you want to do with your life yet. Those are things that people will say to you, by the way, and I want you to hear me when I tell you those people are wrong. Being multi-passionate means that you are someone who has genuine, deep interests in more than one area. You have real skills across different domains. You find meaning in multiple places, and you are wired that way. It's not a flaw in your system, but it is your whole architecture. And for me personally, now I currently work in the bar and beverage world. Like, I care deeply about the craft of what goes into a good drink, the flavors, the technique, the experience of it, the way a great menu can tell a story, and the staff that's serving it, the events that are transpiring around while you're consuming these drinks. That's one whole world that I live in. I have also lived years of my life in the adjacent world of performing and event production. I care deeply about creating a memorable, inspiring experience that helps the audience either self-reflect or enter a whole new world, even if just for a few hours. And then, of course, there's this world, the podcast, the conversations about entrepreneurship and identity and growth, and what it looks like to build a life on your own terms. That's a completely different world, and I love it just as much. And now, obviously, as you can hear, my little son, now there's motherhood, which is not a business, obviously, but it is absolutely a part of my identity and my work, because everything I do flows from who I am, and who I am changed on a cellular level the day my baby arrived. So, how do these things coexist? That's the real question, because what I see happening to a lot of multi-passionate people, especially moms, dads, people who are also trying to build something, people who are multitasking quite a bit, it's that they try to treat their different passions like they're in competition with each other, like they have to choose. And I want to push back on that today. I want to make the case that your different passions are not in competition. They are in conversation. They are building something together that no single focused path ever could. So think about it this way. My work in the bar and entertainment world makes me a better storyteller because I'm always thinking about experience. What does this feel like? What does this taste like? What do I want someone to feel when they encounter this thing I made or this event I produced? And that same lens makes me a better podcaster. And being a better podcaster, having to articulate my thoughts and my perspective over and over again, makes me sharper in my professional work. And being a new mom is teaching me about presence and priorities and letting go of perfection in a way that's going to make me better at everything else. So that's not scatteredness. It's more of like a cross-pollination. And it's one of the most powerful things about being built the way we are, like as multi-passionate people. Now, I have to be real with you because I would be doing you a disservice if I just sat here and told you that being multi-passionate is sunshine and roses and everything works out perfectly. It's also really hard sometimes. And I want to kind of dive into that for a second because the hardest part for me is the noise, not external noise, internal noise. The constant negotiation happening inside of my own head between all of my different identities and commitments and interests. There are days when the bar consultation job needs everything I have, and the podcast feels like a neglected friend. There are days when I'm so deep in a creative flow with this show that everything else feels like it's nagging at me from the edges. And now there's a tiny human who needs me in a way that's completely conditional and completely non-negotiable. And he doesn't care about my content calendar. He doesn't care about my professional development. He just needs his mom. So I have had to get really honest with myself about what evolution actually looks like. Because something that took me a long time to understand is that evolving doesn't always mean adding more. Sometimes it means releasing things, or at least releasing the version of those things that no longer fits. I used to think that being a successful, multi-passionate person meant doing everything at 100% all of the time. Perfect podcast, perfect professional, perfect friend, perfect everything. And that is an impossible standard, and that will exhaust you. I know it exhausted me. What I'm learning very slowly and very imperfectly is that it's less about doing everything fully and more about doing everything intentionally. Being present in whatever lane you're in at that moment, and being able to transition to the next lane without carrying the weight of the last one with you. Definitely easier said than done, I know. I'm still figuring it out. But I also want to talk about something else that I think is really specific to the multi-passionate experience, which is identity grief. Has anyone else ever felt this? It's this weird kind of mourning that happens when you evolve out of one version of yourself. Because the thing is, I'm not the same Marina who even started this podcast 100 episodes ago. I'm not the same Marina who walked into a bar job years ago thinking that she knew what she wanted her career to look like. I'm definitely not the same Marina who existed before I became someone's mother. And sometimes that's joyful. And sometimes it's kind of confusing because those previous versions of me, they were real, they mattered. And letting them go, even to grow into something better, is not nothing. I think we need to give ourselves permission to feel that, to acknowledge the people we were before with love before we fully step into who we are becoming. And again, this evolution happens for everyone, but for the multi-passionate entrepreneur, when you've got a lot of things going on, it seems to happen at a more intense pace. So next, I kind of want to spend a few minutes talking about my bar work specifically, because I think that there's so much in this world specifically that has shaped how I think about entrepreneurship and building things, and I don't talk about it enough on this show. People have this perception of the bar industry. Again, I work specifically in the non-alcoholic sector, but in general, this is something that I think matters a lot if you are dealing in third spaces in general. So this perception is like glamorous in a certain way, or maybe the opposite, kind of dismissed as not a real career track. And both of those things miss the point completely. What the bar world actually is, at its core, is an industry of creators. You're constantly making things with your hands. You're calibrating flavor. You're developing a palate. You're creating an experience for someone in real time and then watching their face when they take that first sip. You know immediately whether it worked. That immediate feedback loop is something that I wish more industries had, because it trains you to iterate fast, to not be precious about your ideas, to taste something, to notice what's off, to adjust it, and to try again, without making the whole thing seem like it's this big identity about you or your worth as a person, right? Like if a drink doesn't work out, that doesn't make you terrible. And I think that translates so directly into entrepreneurship. The ability to put something out, to see how it lands, adjust, and go again, without ego, without attachment to the first version. That is one of the most valuable skills a multi-passionate person can develop. I've also learned a lot about the importance of standards. In a good bar program, you care about the details. The ratios matter, the temperature matters, the way something is presented matters, and that precision does not kill creativity. It actually gives creativity somewhere to live, because when you know the fundamentals inside and out, you can break the rules much more intentionally. You can innovate from a place of knowledge rather than guesswork. I try to bring that same energy to everything else I do. Know the craft, respect the basics, then go make something surprising. And honestly, the work I do developing recipes or thinking about what goes into a great drink and then a great staff to execute those ideas, it's taught me so much about patience, about the fact that good things take time, intention, and intentionality. You can't rush a proper balance. You can't force something to work that just doesn't work. You have to be willing to scrap it and start over. I'm trying to apply that whole process to this new season of my life too. Not forcing, not resting, but just trusting the process. Now, I want to be careful about how I talk about this next point, because I know that everyone's experience of becoming a parent is so different. And I don't want to project or speak for anyone else. I can only speak for mine. So nobody told me how much becoming a mom would make me think about who I am, not just as a parent, but as a person, as a professional, as someone with dreams and ambitions and things she's still trying to figure out. There's this phenomenon that people talk about called matrescence. It's basically the developmental phase that a woman goes through when she becomes a mother, physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And just like adolescence, it's a time where your identity is genuinely in flux. You are not who you were. You are not fully yet who you're becoming. You're kind of in the middle of a transformation, and it can feel incredibly disorienting. And side note here, when I say physically, yes, there's hormones, but there's a lot of other things that go on here too, right? Your whole world and what it means to be is different. All of a sudden, life and death becomes a lot more of a gamble than it ever was before. And I think for multi-passionate women, for entrepreneurs, for creatives, for people who have built a strong sense of self around their work and their pursuits, this concept of matrescence, however you say it, it can hit in a particular way. Because suddenly all of those identities that you've carefully cultivated feel like they're jostling for space with this enormous new role that you didn't fully understand until you were living inside of it. And again, I'll be honest, there were moments in those early weeks where I felt like I was losing the concept of self. And then I felt guilty for even thinking that because I love my baby so completely. And how could I possibly feel like I'm losing anything when I've gained so much? But the feelings were not actually in conflict. They were both true at the same time, and I had to learn how to hold them both. What I kept coming back to in those middle of the night moments was this. I don't think motherhood is meant to erase the woman I was before. I think it's meant to expand her. I think it's calling me to a bigger, deeper, more intentional version of myself, one who knows what actually matters, one who has been cracked open in a way that makes her feel more empathetic and more fierce at the same time. And that is exactly what a multi-passionate entrepreneurship journey requires of us. This willingness to keep evolving, to let each new phase of life add to who you are rather than subtract from it. You don't have to choose. You can trust that there is enough room inside of you for all of your passions and this new identity and the versions of yourself that are still forming. You contain multitudes, and that has always been true. And I think one of the most radical things we can do is just own that fully, without apology. Okay, I want to close out the main content today with something a little more practical because I feel like when a podcast episode has been all philosophy and no takeaway, it's just not the vibe here, right? So I don't want to do that for you. So how do you actually do this? How do you manage a multi-passionate life in a way that doesn't send you into burnout or make everyone around you feel like they're just getting a fraction of you? So here's what's working for me, at least right now in this season. The first thing is what I call seasonal thinking. I'm not trying to do all of my things at full capacity all year round. Right now, I'm in a season that is heavily weighted towards being a new mom. That is the loudest commitment in my life, and it deserves the most of me. But I haven't abandoned my other passions. I've just given them a different level of energy that they might get differently in another season. And I've made peace with that. The podcast slowed down for a while, and that was okay. It's picking up a little bit more now. That's okay too. The second thing is protecting your transition time. When you're multi-passionate, you're constantly switching between modes. You go from mom brain to professional brain to creative brain, sometimes within the same hour. And if you don't give yourself even a tiny bit of transition time, even 5 minutes to breathe and rest and reset, you end up showing up in the middle of one mode while you're supposed to be in another, right? Like your kid might get your work stress, or your work might get your general personhood exhaustion, and like nobody wins. The third thing, and this is the one I resisted the longest, is asking for help. Specifically, asking people in your life to support your multi-passionate identity. Not just to tolerate it, but to genuinely understand why it matters. Because when the people close to you understand that this is who you are, not a phase, not a distraction, not something you'll settle out of eventually, they can actually support you in a meaningful way instead of just subtly or not so subtly pushing you towards a more simple version of yourself. And the fourth thing is giving yourself credit for the days you do it imperfectly. Because some days you're going to be a great mom and a mediocre professional. Some days you're going to knock it out of the park creatively and feel like you're barely keeping the other plates spinning. That is fine. The goal is not perfection on every axis every day. The goal is a life that you love over time on balance. And I want you to remember, side note, that the definition of consistency is not showing up perfectly every day. It's just showing up, period. So if you're doing that, If you're still building, still showing up, still choosing your passions, even when it's messy, you are doing it right. So, episode 101. Wow. I started this podcast because I believed, and I still believe, that people who are building things in all the messy and beautiful and complicated ways that we build things deserve a space that actually reflects that complexity. Not a highlight reel, not a perfect story, but a real one. And I'm back here today, a few months older, a lot more tired, and somehow more clear than I've ever been about why this work matters. Because the conversations we have here about who we are, who we're becoming, what it means to hold multiple dreams at the same time, those conversations have the power to make someone feel less alone, to make someone feel seen, to maybe even give someone permission to stop apologizing for the way they're wired. And that's why I do this. And I missed doing this. So if you're a multi-passionate person who's been in the middle of your own evolution, whether that's a career shift, a new season of life, a big identity change, or just a quiet internal rearrangement that no one else can see, I want you to know that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The evolution is the point. The becoming is the work. Keep going. Now, before I let you go, I have a couple of asks, and I'm going to be real with you. They mean more to me than I'll probably admit. If this episode resonated with you, if any part of it made you feel seen or made you think or just gave you something to sit with, please take 30 seconds and leave a review. Hit 5 stars if you're on any podcasting platform. Wherever you're listening to this, it genuinely helps the show reach more people who need it. And after a few months away, every single one counts more than ever. Also, if you want to continue the conversation, you can always send me an email, hello@marinamars.com, and I'd love to hear from you. Of course, follow along if you're not already, on Instagram, on YouTube, on Spotify, whatever platform you live on, because this show is back, and I have so much I want to talk about. We are just getting started. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for coming back. Thank you for giving this show a reason to keep going. I'm Marina. This is Mocktails with Marina, and I'll talk to you next time. So as always, if you need anything, just let me know.